Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cave of the Cross Apologetics. I'm Patrick.
And I'm Tony.
And we have the great privilege of joining our second guest on the show, but our very first author for a book that we're currently going over, Dr. Mitch Stokes. And trying to delve down into his biography is an interesting one, to say the least, so we'll be talking to him about that. But Dr. Mitch Stokes is a senior fellow of philosophy at New St. Andrews College in Moscow, Idaho. If you're fans of Pastor Doug Wilson, then you'll view that one as interesting. And he teaches graduate courses in philosophy and undergraduate courses in mathematics and logic. He received his PhD in philosophy from Notre Dame under the direction of the great Alvin Plantinga and Peter van Iniguen. At Yale, he earned an MA in religion under direction of Nicholas Walderstroff, and he holds an MS in mechanical engineering, and prior to his philosophy career, worked for an international engineering firm where he earned 5 patents in aeroderivative gas turbine technology. And actually, you're our second guest to hold a job outside of philosophy before going in, and I'm sure it's for the money.
Yes, it definitely was. Yes. Just the fact that I can hold a job at all.
Yes, always good for any philosophy that's not
right.
Delivering coffee. His books includes A Shot of Faith to the Head, Be a Confident Believer in the Age of Cranky Atheists, 2 entries into the Christian Encounter series, one on Isaac Newton and one on Galileo, and of course the little-known book of How to Be an Atheist, Why Many Skeptics Aren't Skeptical Enough. So Dr. Stokes, we thank you and welcome you to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
All right. So I've heard of a few of your interviews before, and I got to ask, mechanical engineering to religion at Yale to philosophy of a Reformed Protestant at Notre Dame, then write a book on how to be an atheist. Where did it all go wrong?
The religion started when I was I prayed a lot during math classes, so that was the thing. I just had to.
I think there's that old adage of as long as there are tests or math tests, there'll always be prayer in school.
Exactly. Yeah, no, it's a circuitous path for sure. It took me forever to end up here. So, but it was good. It was really. I'm glad that God had me take the long road. So I don't know if you were asking this, but I can tell you how I did get from engineering to basically religion and philosophy was through apologetics. So when I was a grad student in engineering, I'd always been a skeptic, always been kind of just questioning, doubting. That was just kind of my temperament. And then, just didn't have a lot of good resources at my disposal, whether it be people or books or whatever. And I was struggling, and it felt to me like I was circling the drain, when it came with respect to my faith. And I had some friends. So this was in Orlando. I had some friends taking courses and who had already actually graduated from Reformed Theological Seminary in Orlando. R.C. Sproul was there at the time, and Richard Pratt, and so they had a lot of good folks. And really, they just said, look, here, they knew I was struggling. And they said, here, read this, listen to this tape, and eventually I got interested enough to actually start taking courses.
At Reformed, right? At Reformed.
Yeah, not to go into ministry or anything like that,
right.
But just to help me keep my head above water. And got into apologetics that way. And I realized, wow, people had already thought about these things before. I wasn't the first to think about all of these issues or ask these questions. And part of it was like I was so relieved, and it was so wonderful, and what a grace. But then at the same time, I was a little annoyed, I'll have to say, because why hadn't I heard this before?
Yeah. The American church tends to undervalue its history, especially if it reaches outside of out of American circles too. And I think too, it's just a lot of people themselves are not trained and don't know where to go. And I would get I'd ask questions, and people would say, "Oh yeah, no, I'm just glad I believe," or
that sort of thing. And,
Yeah. Yeah.
And well-meaning. I mean, they weren't being mean or anything
Right.
like that, but
Yeah.
still not helpful.
Yeah, it's you ask the question and why is it this? Well, because we're right, and it's not really a helpful answer when you have people. Great.
Right.
So you had a job, you had patents, you were living the high life in the engineering, and you just got more and more drafted into apologetics that way.
Yeah. And my wife and I were. So I was working as an engineer, and we were praying. We had a lot of friends that were either at Campus Crusade for Christ, that was their headquarters there. Lots of people in ministry. My friends were pastors, and so I knew that's a thing that you could do. I wouldn't have thought of that before, but it's a thing that you can do. And I really wanted to do some sort of teaching ministry, and so my wife and I we were praying about it and open to whatever God wanted to. Whatever door he wanted us to walk through. It took a while, and then but I was at one of my projects as an engineer was this small catalytic combustion research company. We worked with them, and they were helping us with some of our technology, and they were in New Haven, Connecticut, which I didn't know at the time. That's where Yale was, and I knew who Nicholas Wolterstorff was. So at RTS, we were the philosophy nerds were really into Nicholas Wolterstorff and Alvin Plantinga. So we knew those guys.
Of course.
And I found out that that's where Yale was, and knew that that's where Wolterstorff was. And so I just said, I'll take a chance. And I called them when I was up there one time and said, hey, I'm thinking, would you have time to just help me, talk me through some of this, and could I get your advice, pick your brain, that kind of thing? And he was super gracious and said, yeah, sure, come on down to my office. And so I did, and we talked for quite a while, and eventually he just said, well, what would you think about coming here? And that wasn't on my radar, but I was like, yeah, that sounds great. So I went back to the hotel room and called my wife and was like, so what would you think about us leaving Orlando and engineering and doing, and it wasn't like she again, we had been praying for opportunity, so it wasn't like this was out of the blue. So she was instantly on board. So it was a great opportunity, and we were just super thankful, and that was, it was great.
So religious study at Ivy League, which of course traditionally and again past history, places like Yale and Harvard and Princeton, especially B.B. Warfield and them coming out of the hippie times in the 20s, were kind of traditionally, the bastions of sanity for religious study. But when did you end up going there?
That was 99 to 2001.
Yeah. So is that kind of like a stranger in a strange land? Being philosophy and also a religious study, and a Reformed person at Yale.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Yes and no. In terms of, I had to take 2 classes at the Divinity School, an Old Testament and New Testament course. That was, so I had courses at RTS from a very conservative viewpoint, and we had heard about all. You study the liberal views of higher critical scholarship and all of that. Mm-hmm. But these folks were actually teaching it, so I got to hear it from the horse's mouth. Yeah. And
how much Barth did you have to read?
Well, here's the thing. So Karl Barth at RTS was considered a liberal. He was a fundamentalist. He was considered kind of a conservative fundy at Yale.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah. So it was the other extreme. It was really interesting. But it was the Lord was gracious during that time. We had a great church and lots of great folks who were part of Yale at the church. PhD students, and who were actually religious study. So that it was actually really good. And most of my courses were in the philosophy department, which was much more Christian. I would say much more conservative.
Wow. Yeah. So
at the time.
the folks that were teaching non-conservative, your OT and NUT classes, how just out of curiosity, how different were the horse's mouth from how they are perceived from the earlier school?
Yeah, it was different, and it was certainly not. There was. I wouldn't say that in seminary it was a straw man or anything like that they gave us, but it was more nuanced, hearing it from the horse's mouth for sure. But not entirely. It was still more like, wow, really? And for some of the things, it kind of leads to the whole how to be an atheist.
Yeah,
which I'd been wanting to write for so long. Just, man, if I was a liberal, I would, like you guys. I don't know if I were them, I wouldn't believe the conservatives, and I wouldn't believe their own position. I'd be I would give the whole thing up.
Yeah.
So there was the seed planted.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, why aren't you more? I mean, yeah, I don't know.
And then from there, going to Notre Dame to study under one of our heroes of philosophy, of Alvin Plantinga, his Warranted Christian Belief, that you can also buy the condensed version, which still took me about 3 months to get through, but at least it wasn't the 3 volumes. I'm just going to do it one day, like the Institutes of Calvin. So,
well, the condensed one is actually really, really good. That's why I would have.
No, it is. It is. Yeah. It definitely. It's kind of it boils everything down to kind of the straightforward approach, but it's just really interesting to figure out that you can condense 3 volumes into that much and still have that great of an impact on. Yeah,
and it actually that one is just the last volume condensed. It's really, so the first 2 are more technical philosophy. This one was more philosophy of religion and apology of religion, and that. So it's, but that Warranted Christian Belief is a huge book.
Yeah,
in and of itself.
So how did you kind of make your way over to Notre Dame and under Plantinga?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. It's kind of like the Mecca for, Notre Dame, and studying under Plantinga was kind of the ultimate, dream, I guess I could say. And
sure.
So that was, I applied to a bunch of schools, and this was just one of them. But, it was great to have Nick Wolterstorff as my advisor. I'm sure that was a plus. And so it just turned out that, if you could go anywhere and you had, your choice, it's kind of like all the Christian philosophers, or a lot of them, would want to go there.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Especially, well, it was at the time, and it might still be, it was the #1 school in the world for philosophy of religion. And then if let's say you're a Protestant Reformed guy, it's like, well, Plantinga would be a dream.
Yeah.
I still don't know how I got in, but anyway, I did.
I'm still always impressed every time that I see Plantinga do an interview, or if he's on like Unbelievable broadcast with Justin Brierley, just how down to earth he is, and it's just really kind of refreshing. He's almost kind of, I think, put off and doesn't understand his own. Celebrities for philosophy nerds are, if they're still alive, they're giants to us. But
yeah, right.
Yeah. Speaking of which, when I have this idea of what a philosopher is, it's of course a guy in tweed with glasses, or it's someone like Descartes who goes off into his cabin for 3 days and comes off and pretty much establishes the modern worldview. How did you break the mold and become such a pithy and humorous writer, especially about something like philosophy? It can't be done, but then we read your book and we were laughing halfway through it. In fact, I have highlights that just are really good jokes in your book.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. Thank you. That's encouraging. I mean, I will say this. And this is one of the things my kids are always surprised at. I mean, they kind of don't know my alter ego as a philosopher. I'm like just this kid, that, I mean, like, we're just always laughing. And the other thing too, is I know what it's like to not understand. And so I get frustrated with people who don't explain things well, that write turgidly or whatever. I just don't. It's frustrating. It's like, you could explain this better. You could, I mean, it's not. You can explain almost anything when it comes to like its core views. Like, even if you just said, all right, well, here's the basic. Here, let me tell you about chemistry. So chemistry, I'll explain to you. Chemistry is just it's about is the exchange of electrons between atoms and molecules. That's it. Like, you can succinctly put whatever it is, in some form to get it across. Anyways, all that to say is I don't like to not understand, and I know what it's like to not understand. And I also know what it's like to be really bored with this material and just with learning in general. And it's, one of the things, this is more of a pedagogy teaching kind of point, but you think about like the math teacher who just went into it because she loves math, which is great. But some teachers are like that, and they don't realize that the kids absolutely hate it.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And so you've got to know, first of all, it's really hard. Second of all, no one likes it and no one wants to be there. So you've got to change things up, and you've got to make it so that you're getting the main and only the main points across, and in a way that your audience can relate to. And that takes time to figure that out. But again, I think part of it is just because I'm not brilliant, and so I know what it's like to not understand. So
yeah, I think
I kind of just teach myself, and it's like, well, here's what I want. I wish someone would have told me this.
Yeah, and had a good quip in the middle there. But yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why we started this show too. Is just there's a lot of good stuff out there, a lot. I remember doing a book with Tony Scott Oliphant's Covenantal Apologetics, and there was one chapter that he had where it was about using the Trinity when it was to talk to Muslims, and I was like, this is the worst possible thing that you could do. I don't understand this. And we sat down and we had a 2.5-hour discussion on it, and by the end of it, I was like, "This is a really good, yeah, absolutely. This is what should be done." Completely changed my mind, and it was just great to kind of have someone who's again way smarter than me. I mean, he's the one with the doctor before his name. I'm just the BSer in the fact that I have the bachelor's of science in criminal justice, nonetheless, but a minor in philosophy. So I can pour myself a cup of coffee. And so, yeah,
that's right. There you go.
I appreciate your book, and especially as an editor too. When we come to discussion of this, it's really good in your How to Be an Atheist book to break it down just by your headings. Your headings are pretty much where I draw the line at where we make these little short clips for sharing, and people can understand it and kind of break it down even more if they want to rewatch the same video over and over again.
So that's helpful to know.
Yeah. So how'd you come to write this book? So the book is How to Be an Atheist, right? Why many skeptics aren't skeptical enough.
Yeah, it goes back to my own skepticism and my own doubts and my own anti-authoritarianism. I just don't see. Yeah, I guess I would always think, well, if I was an atheist, this is how I would be. I wouldn't, someone comes at me with their morality. I'd tell them to take a hike. I mean, how about this? I tell them to take a hike if it didn't get me beat up or something.
Yeah.
But it was just like, yeah, really? You're gonna? I mean, I can't imagine them falling for all of what they fall for. And so, I mean, and again, I'm an equal opportunity skeptic. So, I mean, I've struggled with faith. I've struggled, with all kinds of things, and I still have lots of questions. And I know, and I've given up the quest for absolute certainty long ago. But it's just interesting how so many atheists are they're just so certain. You read Richard Dawkins, and you just think, man, that's intellectual folly. I totally get not being a Christian. That I get.
Yeah.
I don't understand someone who is so cocksure about such a weak position.
Yeah.
And so then contrast someone like Richard Dawkins with someone like Thomas Nagel, who's an excellent atheist.
Right.
He's thoughtful, he's measured, he
seems to go after atheists more than the Christian side even.
Well, he definitely is. He's very, and the other person I mentioned too is Alexander Rosenberg, and he's hardcore, and he's a philosopher of science. He's a Hume expert, so he's skeptical himself, and he's just, he's one of the few that has gone as far as, denying objective morality. I mean, he just says, yeah, you're right. There's Now I don't think he's entirely consistent, but anyways, he's great. Contrast him and Thomas Nagel with people like Daniel Dennett and Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens.
Yeah. So consistent and inconsistent atheists, basically, right?
So this book is really just like, look, let's everyone just try to be as consistent as we can. We all can improve on our we can all do better. Let's just, if we're not clear about our own position and the implications of our own position, you're not really the conversation isn't going to go as well as it could.
Right. And you should admit it as well, right?
Yeah. And look, let's just be self-aware about our position and where we're weak, where we're strong, and go from there.
Yeah. So the book is split up into two sections. The first section is on science, and then the second section is on morality. So let's just talk briefly, and we're working our way through the book. In fact, I'm not sure when this particular show is going to be introduced. So some of this might be, we should probably give spoiler alerts if we're not going to be at the end of the book. But so let's talk about the science part and then the morality part. So tell us a little bit about what you're trying to accomplish here in the science, the first half of the book here.
Yeah. So and actually it's three parts. So there's a little part at the very beginning where I talk about just our intellectual faculties, so sense perception and reason.
Right. Yeah.
And
Sorry, I left that out.
Run through that and bring up basically a lot of the questions that Hume had, and he had some great points and stuff that Plantinga has brought up. All of that I think is good. That if we were just, as Russell said, collocation of atoms, we would have lots of reasons to doubt our sense perception and our reason, and to doubt our doubting, and on and on and on. So that's what I do in that very first little part, to get that out of the way. And then I say, okay, let's set all of that aside. Let's just assume that our cognitive faculties, our sense perception, our reason is as reliable as you want.
Right.
So everything works really well, and it gloms on to the truth.
Right.
So we'll take our cognitive faculties for granted. Well, what's the next step? Well, let's see. It seems like
so. The idea is, what can we know from there, right?
Yeah, exactly. And well, if most atheists would say, well, let's look to science.
Right.
Sure. With an understanding that science is kind of like this as you call it, photoshopped version, where it seems squeaky clean and neat, and it almost takes out the human factor of doing science.
Yeah, it really does. It's the science that people have in mind is this, and it's interesting that scientists even talk like this too, that it's really this squeaky clean, highly sanitized, like you said, Photoshop version of it. And it's just so, I mean, I think that sells science short. You know, I mean, like the scientists are doing things that are way harder and way more creative and way more intuitive. I mean, it takes intellectual skill, it takes creative artistry, I'm an enormous fan of science, and but real science, because it's like, man, these humans do some really hard stuff, and they kind of do things sometimes intuitively, which is, you know, like a musician would, you know, rather than like a logician would, and it's fascinating.
Yeah. So, but you're not. So science is good. It's helpful. It's tough, but so you're not really criticizing it, but you're questioning. So what exactly are you trying to get at with this then?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. You're right. I'm not science bashing in the least. I mean, right. I'm so pro science. So I'm very, very pro STEM, math, science, engineering, all of that. There's really two ditches, and that's kind of like, I try to teach my students this. If, you know, look, guys, if there's one thing that I want to teach you is, for most of these issues in life, you're trying to avoid two ditches on either side of the road. And so when it comes to science, you have, on the one hand, people who think that, you know, science is infallible, and, you know, that they way overestimate it in terms of its abilities. But then you have the other ditch where people underestimate it, and, you know, they think, well, just because it's, on the one hand, on the optimistic side, you have people saying, no, well, it must be true because science says it. Right. And then on the other side, you have people say, well, it must be false, science says it. and really neither side is consistent at all. But that's kind of their tenor and their sentiments. And I don't want us to do that. So part of this is to point out the limitations of science. I mean, so that's really the main part. So I'm really going after that one ditch, the overly optimistic ditch. But there's still a part of me that's a little wary of that project, because I don't want people in the other ditch taking hold of this, right, and abusing it.
Right, right.
So in the book, in fact, the one that I think we just aired, or actually no, we just went over, hasn't aired yet. You talk about instrumentalism and how kind of comparing and contrasting two views of science. One view is the fact that science attempts to get at what is truth, and then instrumentalist says, well, you have these theories that come about, and they're true in and only as so far as they provide you either accurate results or move along the process, or helps you develop the cell phone.
Or even we don't even care if they're true, just as long as they're working.
Yeah,
right?
Just like,
yeah.
And I think you do just a great job, and I'm there's no negative critique that this interview is going to have. So you're just going to get praise heaped on you, and I don't care. It's half of my show. I can do what I want. But I think you do an amazing job of giving a good history of philosophy in the way that I was taught, with the examples of the geocentrism and the heliocentrism. I think that's a really good point, because of just how many factors you bring in of your points. Things like the advent of technology and the just the fact that everyone had the same observations, but then, okay, what do you do with it once you hit a disagreement with it?
Right.
So then, as Christians, if we're maybe not having the confidence in science to tell us what's true, and we should accept instrumentalism, are we able to then take what we point to and say, well, the Bible says here something that confirms what science has said? Are we able to kind of still hang our hat on that, or should we be more nuanced about it?
Well, I certainly am in favor of nuance. One of the, it could certainly be tempting for let's say young Earth creationists to hang his or her hat on instrumentalism. Say, well, look, we got science has been wrong about all these different things, and so what are the odds that it's right now? And I think there's something to that argument.
In fact, that's just the opposite argument of the miracles argument. Right? It'd be a miracle if they got it right this time.
Yeah, and so, and a lot of it boils down to the kind of evidence that you have for all these theories, whether it's in physics and even within, say, physics, they're just different aspects of different kinds of evidence. And you just have to know, sometimes we have really good evidence that it'd be like, there's really no other alternative that we have right now. And we don't have any evidence that we're wrong. And so there's really good reasons to believe these. Then there are other things when you get to, let's say we're talking about string theory and multiverses and things like that. And it's like, well, that's entirely different data set and kinds of conclusions there. And so
222 dimensions.
Yeah. So you really just you can't just go, okay, well, it's all wrong or it's all right. It's like, yeah, sorry, it's just not that easy. There is, you can't even say that physics, think about, so quantum mechanics, let's say, or quantum field theory, which combines special relativity and quantum mechanics. You have some place like the Large Hadron Collider in CERN in Switzerland. That's the biggest, most elaborate machine humans have ever made. There's got to be something right about subatomic part, even though we can't see even electrons, or proton. You can't see those. But they're doing things with them, apparently. Like the whole system works together in such a way that it really would be a mirror. You'd have to be overly cynical and have an agenda that, that you couldn't get out of to say that there's nothing to that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It just seems
just like how Newtonian mechanics, although inaccurate and replaced by other theories, it works really well, and we landed men on the moon, which is always our point of absolute contention as a human species of proving something. But at the same time, I've told this story before. I remember being in the second year physics class in college and being told that the thing that I've been learning about since fifth grade science class is pretty much wrong, and there are better theories out there that get you more accurate results.
Yeah, and so you're definitely going to have that kind of thing. You're going to have different. You're going to have. I don't doubt that quantum mechanics and there's going to be something that supersedes that, whether it's putting the two together or throwing that out. So I don't doubt that. But I would be very surprised if there turns out to not be electrons. So like now, at the same time, if there turned out not to be electrons, that would be, I probably wouldn't be that shocked either. But we would probably just say, well, electrons aren't what we thought they were. Right. We've already talked about that. Back in the quantum revolution, back in the 1920s, when there's just is it a particle or is it a wave? And it's yes and no. And so there are still electrons and there's still particles. They're just not what we thought they were. So we're doing something with these things. And so some of this stuff will probably get carried along to the new theories. And then some of it will go by the wayside, It could be, and even when it comes to like the our theory of gravity, I think that it's ultra accurate. But man, I would not be surprised if we, have something else later on. So, but all that to say, I mean, my point is just like there are some things that will probably survive the theory and some things won't.
Mm-hmm.
Like right now, it's hard to see, the future's hard to see.
So this section then in the book is saying we should be sober skeptics about what science can tell us, and we shouldn't veer to one side of the what would you call it, the the ditch or the other, right? We should kind of be middle road type with regard to what we hold to that science allows us to say about for physics about the physical world.
Well, it tells us some true things and other things it doesn't, and we just have to be aware of us not knowing exactly where. But then we also need to know that where our theories are tenuous, and that's where what I try to point out in the book is, look, as we get out, you need to know when we get to the skinny branches. Right. And then when we're out on the skinny branches, we need to go, let's be a little careful because these are pretty thin, and just be aware that we're on the skinny branches rather than, you have someone like Lawrence Krauss who has this book called Universe from Nothing. Right. I mean, wow.
Yeah. Like how skinny branch can you get?
Yeah.
And being on a skinny branch is fine. I don't mind that. It's being on a skinny branch and never letting your audience know that, hey, you know what?
Being honest, yeah.
This is the skinny branch.
Which I think that's where I think he loses, in his debates. I remember him debating John Lennox and just Lennox taking him to task about, all right, is your word nothing actually mean nothing, or does it mean something? Because it seems like you're invoking something from the nothing. I'm not trying to get into what logical positivists would throw us out of the universities for, but the sense that if at least be intellectually honest about what you're doing as what you say about how we should view science in our understanding of the world.
Right. Yeah.